Stand on my tippy toes here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to McNally Robinson tonight. We're so thrilled you can make it out tonight for the launch of Crimson by Arthur Slade. Very exciting. We've got lots of copies, as you can see here. And it is already #1 on our bestseller list for young readers, so congrats on that. Before we begin, I just would like to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Plains Cree, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. And as I said, we are here tonight to celebrate the launch of Crimson by Arthur Slade. So I'm not going to say too much. I think a few of you folks already know him, but just in case, I'll read the official bio. Arthur Slade was raised on a ranch in the Cypress Hills of Saskatchewan. He is the author of 18 novels, possibly more now.
Yes.
22, the author of 22 novels, including The Hunchback Assignments, which won the prestigious TD Canadian Children's Literature Award and its 3 sequels, and Dust, winner of the Governor General's Award for Children's Literature. He's also the author of the acclaimed graphic novel Modo, Ember's End, and he lives in the mythical city of Saskatoon. So with that, I'd like you to give a very warm welcome to Arthur Slade.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, McNally, for being here, for existing. Thank you, McNally. I'm so glad you're here, but also for hosting me and for having this, a place where we can do these kind of events. It is just a lovely place to launch a book, and I've launched a couple here, so I'm getting used to it now. And I do have to thank HarperCollins because they did a wonderful version with this cover. I'm really, really pleased with the cover and with the book. You should perhaps, if you're going to read the book, thank my editor. Well, I will thank her too, but you should thank her because the dreck I was going to give to you people to read was horrible. She made it so much better. So yeah, it was like twice as long. Anyway, I don't want to get into how bad it was, but it is much better now with my editor's help. And of course, I look up front and I see my family's here. So thank you for coming. I'm sorry, I had to twist your arm and all that. Oh, no problem. They're saying we really enjoy hearing you talk over and over again. So with all the thank yous out of the way, I think what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a bit about where the inspiration came for this book. And there's several different kind of areas where it came from. And I think my helper here, Tanea, because I can't use my phone right now to change my iPad, Tanea is going to tap on that. I'm going to just, wasn't that a neat special effect? I'm going to, it's kind of a subliminal no, it's not really subliminal if you can see it, is it? Yeah. But anyway, you might see this cover a couple times in the presentation. Once or twice. But every time, I guarantee, it's a different special effect. So that's what you can look for. So, yeah. But I do want to talk a bit about the inspiration for this book and kind of where it came from. And it is my first fantasy novel. I've always have some kind of fantastical element in my books. I have a character who can change his shape, and except that's set in kind of historical Victorian Britain times. And so there's always something I kind of inject into the normal world. But this is my first stab at a real full life fantasy novel in a totally alternate world. And I have to admit, I was a little nervous about it. I've read them my whole life. They're really hard to write. When you can make up everything, right? And that means that it's a lot of work to figure out what the rules are for the different lands and how the magic works, that sort of thing. But let's go back.
What?
Just tap on it, please.
Which way?
On the right-hand side. So 1976, will you tap it again on the same side? Thank you. So people probably recognize The Hobbit, right? And this was when I was in grade 4, which that was 1976. I think I had my math right. It's a long time ago, a year before Star Wars came out. I am getting more geeky by the moment. But my teacher, Mr. Fitzgerald, read that book to us. And it really, when I look back to thinking of them, I know my mother had read to me, but my first kind of memory of a book that really affected me was The Hobbit. That whole idea that there were these hobbits, you can go to this alternate world, there are dragons, there's elves, there's dwarves, and there's giant spiders, and all sorts of things like that, really amazed me. And really, I just remember being agog at listening to the story. And there's something about that whole act of someone reading a story to you, kind of that oral culture where you're just soaking it in and is letting your imagination kind of flow with the story. And I feel like I've told this a million times, but partway through hearing The Hobbit, my family decided to do something horrible. They took us to Disneyland, and which was actually wonderful. I mean, how often you get to go to Disneyland, right? Except I still remember being on that plane and thinking, I can't believe I'm missing The Hobbit. When I get back, like what have I missed? I'll have to read it my own. But it really changed kind of how I viewed reading, I guess. And I think when I started writing this book, I started to think about what books had I read when I was younger. What has it really helped turn me into a writer? And I have to say, I've looked at this cover a million times of The Hobbit. That was the one. In fact, I don't know that I still have the original book I have, but that was the cover because I remember it very clearly. And it wasn't until just today I'm looking at it, and I'll just point. That's the first time I've noticed that's Bilbo right there. And he's invisible, and he's kind of bent over, and he's got his hat off, and he's bowing to the dragon, even though the dragon can't see him because he's invisible. And I thought, I have stared at that cover over and over again, and now I finally notice one little thing. So you never know what you're gonna when you're gonna do a talk. You never know what's gonna leap out at you. The other thing, see how different special effect? Oh, wait, we have to go back.
Yes. What the heck? Oh.
Wait, no.
Oh, wait, we're gonna go that way.
You have to tap right there. You have to go back. There. Okay. Right there. Okay. Oh. Little technical difficulties there. I just find it was just funny to me that they have the same colors. That was not planned at all. I did not beg them, please use the colors from this Hobbit on my book. But it just turned out that way. And of course, the more I stared at this cover, because it has those little dots and things on it, and you stare at something long enough, they start to mean something to you. And I'm just going to point out one more thing. You won't be able to see it, actually. I stared at it far too much. I started to realize this is starting to look like a person in the background. These are the kind of things that authors do when they get their books. They've been waiting for years. Like, I think I'm just going to stare at this. Kind of like when I used to stare at heavy metal albums when I was a kid and go, oh, I wonder what every song means. And I'm still wondering about that sort of thing. This is very painful for you, I know. Okay, tap it again, please. So the other thing that Mr. Fitzgerald brought to us was Dungeons and Dragons. And again, if anybody has ever played that game before, this was before anybody had ever heard of it. It was only kind of a university game. And here he is teaching us in grade 4 how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And it was a few years later that it became the satanic game that people were playing for all sorts of horrible things that teens were doing. But this, if you haven't played the game, it is a game that takes place in your imagination. And there are all sorts of dice that you roll. There's 20-sided dice, and they're 8-sided, and you come up with characters who are like fighters, or they're clerics, and they're elves and dwarves. And so it's very much like The Hobbit has come to life in a game. And so for me, I love that whole idea of just imagining the game. And the key for me in the game is that there is someone called the Dungeon Master who tells the story of the game. So you decide as the characters where you're going to go, like we're going to go walking towards this mountain, and then you roll the dice and go, oh, what happens that day? And then suddenly, something will appear, and then you go, well, I'm going to pull out my sword. But all of that is, I'm of course not telling it very well. As the Dungeon Master, you have to tell the story. Well, then you do this, and then this happens, and you explain everything so that people feel like they're really there. And again, to me, that was what became writing. That was really kind of, in some ways, the first kind of stab at writing is telling people the story as it went along. And the curious thing about Dungeons and Dragons, and again, I know some of you, I can see some of you are falling asleep. But the curious thing about it is that if the memories feel real, and that will sound really odd, but if you've played Risk, and I've played Risk a million times, or I've played chess, I can't remember a specific game. I can maybe remember somebody getting mad at me when they lost, or me getting mad when I lost. But with Dungeons and Dragons, if I sat down with my friends from high school and said, remember that time you were in that pub and you were all elves and dwarves and you thought, wait, let's go rob that guy in the alley, and then it turned out he was a demon? They go, I do remember that. And it's the strangest thing. It's almost like a real memory. And so again, I felt like as a writer, or someone who was going to become a writer, that was something that really, really affected, who I was becoming and the way I looked at telling stories. See, we've already gone ahead 10 years. So I actually took this picture today. And again, this is the curious thing about ideas. It's really, you should never throw your ideas away. And apparently you should never throw your old hard disks away either. Because this was the original version of the book that you see on the table over there. And way back when I was 17, when I was 16, I wrote my first book, and no one should ever read that book. It was horrible. My second book was readable, but not publishable. And it was called The Black Oak. And I can still remember the story very basically. It was about a queen who ruled this world, and there was someone named Mandarin who was kind of this evil creature who she had defeated a long time ago and buried in the ground. And this is called the Black Oak because this black oak is growing up from where his body was, and eventually he's going to come back to life. And that's the kind of main part of the story. And I actually even started the sequel, The Fall of the Griffin, but I got bored and didn't finish it. And but the idea stuck with me. Those books eventually, that was just me training. I did send them out, and they never found a home. It's so sad. Sometimes books just don't find homes, and it was not meant to find a home. But when I started thinking about this book and knowing I wanted to write fantasy, I still love that idea of writing about a queen. And I love the name Mandarin. There was something about that name. And I started to draw on this. I didn't go and read them again, but I drew on the memory of them to kind of bring this new story into the world. So look at how quickly we've gone through it's like I've got gray hair already, and just a while ago I had a mullet. I mean, it's so sad. But yes, 2010, something different happened in our life. And thank you, Tanea. And back in 2010, my wife and I went to China. And we went to China for a very, very special reason. We were adopting a daughter. And I won't go into the kind of the whole experience of that, other than I put a few pictures up here, just to give an example of what we saw. And one of the things that I found happened is going to China. I've been to other countries. I've been to Iceland and I've been to England. And those, when I go to those countries, I feel like I'm just seeing a reflection of where I live. Like I know Icelanders who live in Saskatoon, and I go to Iceland, I know, there's Icelanders here too. And so I feel like I was still looking at my culture, right? But when you go to China, it was just, obviously China has had a culture for thousands and thousands of years. They have this long and amazing history. And it really, in some ways, it felt like I was walking into a fantasy world, because it was so different than what I had experienced. And not just in that the people were different. I mean, they were incredibly friendly. The food was amazingly good. But the landscape, it was just nothing. I grew up in the prairies, right? And when you go to a kind of a rainforest, an area like this, it really, your body just feels different. And that really affected me. I mean, obviously the whole experience of adopting and all that affected me too. And so I won't, in fact, I didn't take good enough notes that I could tell you what all these things were, and I won't give you a travel log, other than this tower here. The picture is on the right-hand side there is taken from the tower. And this is all in the southern part of China in a province called Guangxi. And it was just, those almost a week that we spent, I guess it was 5 days, it just felt like we were in this dream world the whole time, except for the mornings because we had to do paperwork. But every afternoon you'd go out and you'd look at things, and it was always this new and amazing experience. And at the bottom there, one of the places we went to was a village. and we got to go and see what the people were doing in the village, and they put up with us basically. And that scene right there, it's kind of a distant scene, but the women were out washing. They were washing their clothes in the rain, and I guess they were getting doubly clean if you're doing that. We're all huddling under our umbrellas, but they're all out washing. And so we got this real kind of experience of both. Nanning City is, I think it was 3 or 4 million. Like it's a big city that I had never heard of before. Like, you know, so it's all brand new to me. And then we got to see what the small town, you know, life of China felt like. And of course, you know, we came back from China and we'd brought our daughter Tanea with us. And when I started working on this book, one of the things that really hit me is it was the first time I really felt like I wanted to write a book for her, a book that when she read, she would see herself in it. And that was one of the kind of one of the motivating factors. When you're an author, you're looking. It often takes about a year to write a book, depending on how long the book is. And so you're looking for that kind of emotional charge, that thing that will carry you all the way through the book, and will keep you interested in it, but also make you believe in the characters, make the characters more real. And so for me, kind of imagining, you know, that what we had experienced, but also trying to write something that was a bit more personal, I guess. That was all kind of that really changed how I viewed this book. It wasn't going to be a book like The Hobbit exactly, because it was going to have different influences than what I had kind of grown up with. And so that was my intention when I sat down to write the book. So wasn't that neat? Like that was like the third special effect. Yeah. Sometimes I didn't want to scare anybody, but you could have a little hammer sound at the same time. Oh, the book just came down. Anyway, I am going to read a little bit from the book, just from the very beginning, because that way I don't have to explain anything to you. And yeah, I think that's all I have to explain. Prologue. Fen did not struggle as she watched the Queen's Guard dismount from his charger and draw the blade that would soon sever her hand. She was in the middle of the village square, in the middle of her 11th summer, and despite the fear in her heart, she decided the guard was the most beautiful and perfect man she had ever seen. He was slim, ivory-skinned, and wide-shouldered. He towered over the villagers as they parted to let him through. His golden eagle diadem, a symbol that was an extension of the Queen, held his shoulder-length hair out of his eyes. That hair was a bright red, as were the locks of all Queen Servilia's elite guardsmen. The color was a sign of the magic that had shaped him. His armor shone, detailing every chest muscle. There were tales the metal was poured directly onto the guard's flesh, an impenetrable skin. The royal red artificers, the only crafters allowed to shape magic, had designed the armor. Even if the suit was penetrated, the wounds of the Queen's Guard were said to heal in moments due to the Queen's blood in their veins. Fen just wanted to touch the armor once, and the hair, too. Her own hair was dark and long, her skin a yellowish brown, much the same color as every other villager's. They were the people of Village 21, the workers of the red earth mines and the rice fields. The Queen's Guard looked as if he had stepped down from the heavens. "Keep very still," Fen's mother whispered. She pressed her daughter's right arm against the execution block. Lynn was a wiry woman. A lifetime of working in the mines had tightened every muscle, but the wrinkles around her eyes didn't hide her tears. She had chosen to be at her daughter's side instead of letting another villager do this duty. "I won't see you as a thief. You'll always be my child, whether you have one hand or two. But don't steal again. We don't need pretty things." "I know, Mama," Fen breathed. "It was stupid. Stupid." Moments earlier, Lynn had slipped Fen a ginger stone. It burned sweetly on Fen's tongue. "Swallow that candy, my dear." Lynn's voice was gentle. "You don't want to choke on it." Fen bit into the soft center, all the while staring at the approaching Queen's Guard. He moved with such magnificence. No wonder the Queen's enemies broke at the sight of a charging column of these red-haired sentries. Fen swallowed the remains of the ginger stone in one gulp. "Be as strong as a horse," her mother intoned. "Be as brave as a tiger." It was an old saying. Fen didn't feel brave. She'd nearly wet her trousers when the cries of a rider from the Queen had echoed through the village. First, a mud-speckled herald on a grey gelding had galloped down the river road and past the huts, his purple cloak, the Queen's colour, flapping. "The Queen's justice shall be done," the herald had shouted to the gathering crowd. He was a short, pale man with a scar that slithered from his chin to his cheek, splitting both lips. Despite his spattered clothes, he smelled sweet. Those from Regentium often wore perfume. They lived in houses stuffed with cushions and carpets. Most were as light-skinned as this man. "Bring the offender to me." Lynn had taken Fenn's hand. "We cannot change this," she'd whispered. "We can only face it." She led Fenn to the herald. "This is my elder daughter. This is Fenn. Place her arm on the executioner's block. Be quick. We have 3 more sentences today. Hold the arm straight. We want a clean cut." Lynn's mother tightened her grip. The Queen's Guard stopped before Fenn. This man had likely fought for 100 years, or even 1,000, perhaps had been in the War of the 10 Cities itself, and yet he looked no older than 18. Is this the transgressor? His jaw was hairless and smooth. He had been forged in the same way a sword had been forged. "Yes, she is," Lynn said, "though she's just a child." "Silence," the herald shouted. "Every citizen, no matter the age, must obey the Queen's law. That is what keeps the peace." The Queen's Guard looked directly at Fenn. His eyes were blue and cold and perfect, the same as the Queen's. Each guard was designed to reflect her likeness. Everything about him was so unbelievably immaculate. Not a hair out of order, not even a scar on his face. She wondered if the awe she felt was forced on her by the Queen's magic. "No!" It was a small voice, but shrill. "Not her hand!" May, Fenn's sister, pushed her tiny body between the guard and Fenn. "You can't have her hand!" Somehow May had escaped their neighbor's clutches. May put her own hand over Fenn's. "Get out of here," Fenn whispered. "Go!" "Yes, go!" The herald grabbed May. "Or we'll cut off your hand too." He tossed her toward the crowd. Fenn didn't see who caught May, only that she was being held, and she was safe. "Now," the herald said, "down to business." He unrolled a muddy scroll. "Queen Servilia, she who freed you from the tyranny of Manzrin, she who has brought you a millennium of peace, she who is the mother of our land, she who is the law incarnate, has declared Fenn, of Village 21, a thief. On this, the 25th day of the month of Mea, in the 1007th year of Her Majesty's reign, Fenn has been sentenced to have her right hand removed. The Queen, in her mercy, will not take her subject's life." He closed the scroll. "Prepare for the Queen's justice." The Queen's Guard lifted his sword, and the sun caught the blade. The villagers made a small sound of expectation. Somewhere in the crowd, May began to squeal. "Don't let your tongue slip between your teeth," Lynn whispered, then even quieter. "I love you." The Queen's Guard was the arm of the Queen, reaching all the way from Regentium. Fenn had dreamed of meeting her someday, of standing in her presence and being raised up to the royal court. Fenn's mother and sister would be so proud. But today she would meet the Queen in another way. For Fenn had heard that at the moment of punishment, the Queen herself would look through her guard's eyes to be certain justice was done. The guard swung the sword. I think I'll stop right there. Sorry. I feel like I don't really want to read what happens next. It's just kind of, in fact, it feels really dark and like scary. It's like, you're supposed to have this dramatic beginning to a book. That's what I was told in these classes. And so I feel like I have to lighten things up a little bit. So could you tap? Aww. There. All those dark feelings you're feeling, they're just all suddenly disappeared in the cuteness of the little bunnies. Actually, that's kind of frightening too, now that I look at it. Yet another special effect. So if you have any questions, I will attempt to answer them right now. I can't read minds or anything like that, but I will answer anything that you come up with. And it can be about the book or about writing. No mathematical questions, though. I refuse. Good. Now, are there any questions? This is actually Facebook Live, in case you're wondering.
I don't know. There's been a lot of stuff going by.
Yeah.
So I don't know if can I go backwards?
No, if there's nothing that's clear on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, is there? Oh, there's a hand over there. Yeah.
Is there a particular element of writing this book that was more challenging than your previous books?
You know, I think the whole fantasy was really threw me. Even though I've read fantasy my whole life, having to sit down and write it was really, really difficult. Everything has to make sense, even though it's a fantasy world. And so that, other times when I was writing about, say, the Victorian period, I could do all this research about what it was like to live back then, and then I could add some little fantastical detail. But here I had to kind of support where all the magic came from and kind of make up rules. And I did lots of reading about how other people write fantasy fiction, and I hope it helped me. I don't know. But I think it's because the canvas just seems so wide when you sit down. It's like, I can do whatever I want. Oh, this is so great. And it's like, what do I want to do? And so I think that was probably the more difficult thing. The book, the story itself, actually, I actually wrote it fairly quickly. In terms of it often I'll write a book and then half of it half of this book got deleted too. But there were a lot of rewrites before it becomes the actual shape you want it to be. This book, there was really one major rewrite, and I keep hinting at it. What my editor, my kind, wonderful editor, said was, you know this character, because I had it going from one character's point of view to another character's view all the way through the book. You know this second character? I think you should maybe cut that viewpoint out. And after I was done crying, no, it was an interesting moment, because I looked at it, I thought, yeah, you know, I didn't think that right away, but I thought, once you cut out that character, then the story just moves twice as fast, and you fill in the blanks because that character, they were kind of telling the same story in a way, and that just made the book move so much faster. So that was just, it's one of those moments, and that's what editors are great at. That's why they get the big bucks, is they come up with, oh, you know, you meant to write this, and they make you feel good about having to make those changes too, which is a real gift.
I have a question from here though. Somebody named Wendy Slade, I think that it might be Ken.
No
Slade,
relation.
says, who is your favorite brother?
Who's my favorite brother? Oh, wow. Which ones are on Facebook? I only have two of them. I'd have to say it's Ken Brett.
Ken Brett.
That's both their names, by the way.
That's
There's
it.
one more.
Yes.
No, I mean one more brother.
Oh, yes, that's right. My brother David too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did the points of views from the different characters come from Gordon Corman's books?
This person here, Tanea, asks whether the point of view, for the switching of the point of view of characters, whether that idea of doing that came from Gordon Corman's book, which we're reading right now, which is called Slacker. And I have to say that I didn't steal that from Gordon Corman, that they've been doing that for a while. So, and I hadn't read Slacker yet, so honestly, please, Gordon Corman, don't sue me. But you're right, that's what it was like, because that book goes back and forth into different points of view. Yes?
Are you working on anything else? And if you are, is it a fantasy novel again?
So am I working on anything else? And if I am, is it a fantasy novel? I'm working on a couple of different things. One is a book about the Roman Empire that I feel like it's going to take longer than it took them to build the Roman Empire for me to get it done. We're talking about it for years. But I'm working on that, and it's all about the rise of Augustus, the first emperor, who was only 17, 18 when he decided, you know what, I think I can take over the whole world, and I'll bring my two 18-year-old friends with me. When I was 18, I was going, you know what, I think I can put some gas in my car and drive around for a while. But obviously he had different ideas of what he wanted to do with his life, and thus he became the emperor. So that's one of the books that I'm working on. I do have an idea for another fantasy novel, but I haven't really progressed to the point of writing it down. I've written down the ideas, like what I think it's about, and I don't want to get into too much detail about it, but I haven't actually started writing it yet. And yeah, so those are some of the things. I kind of jump all around. I write all sorts of things. Yeah.
Is this a one-off, or is there a potential for a series?
the question is whether it's a one-off or a potential for a series. And right now, it's a one-off. Like the book itself is complete. There's no, you don't have to read, you don't get to the end and go, oh, no, I shell out more money to this author so he can live in his mansion. There's no way I'm going to do that. But once I've created that world, it's like, there are, like any book, there's questions at the end. And I find those questions kind of running around the back of my head and going, is there another story that I can tell here? There's a whole story that happens kind of because she's been queen for 1,000 years. But as we learned from Star Wars 1, 2, 3, sometimes it's not good to tell those previous stories. Sorry for anybody I've offended by saying that. So, but yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying there may be, I don't have anything right now, but once you do all the work of creating it, well, why don't I put some more people back in it?
Canvas is ready.
Yeah.
That's right, the canvas is ready. Yeah.
As you were creating, was it character first, world first, or plot first?
I think whether it's character, world, or plot, for me it was plot. It was that very basic what happens next. That the story with her, like that was when I started writing. That's exactly where I started. Was here she is. There's this amazing, magical creature, Queensguard, coming towards her, about to chop off her hand, and she's looking at him going, oh, he's so beautiful. Oh yeah, he's going to chop off my hand. And that was me going, okay, well, how do I what happens next? Like, what is the point of that isn't to gross people out or scare them. I mean, obviously you want to keep them enthralled in the story, but the point is, how does that one thing that happens to her, whether it happens or not, I'm not sure, how does that change the whole story? So that's what I kept asking. For me, in many ways it's plot. All those other things are entwined with the character and the world. They all start to kind of grow around those first kind of questions, if that makes sense. Yes?
Can you make a Titanic book?
Can I make a Titanic book? Gordon Corman's already done one. Actually, he's done 3. So, again, Gordon, please don't sue me.
You said you read books about writing fantasy. I just wondered, in your day or your week of writing, how do you decide, okay, I've written enough, I'm going to research, or I'm going to go get some eggs, or how do you create your day?
How do I decide when to go shopping, when to do the research, and when to write? For me, it's writing is such a great, or researching is such a great way to avoid actually writing. So I can research all day long and not go and buy any eggs or anything like that at all. I think it's at the point where I feel like I know enough. And there's a real danger I find with research, is that I get sucked into it and I don't do the writing. It's just too easy to research, and then you get bored of the topic. And it's hard to explain, but there's a point where when I'm doing the research, I go, okay, this is enough. I just need to tell this story, and then, kind of go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm concerned about this character that you had to let go of. And I'm wondering, do you think that little germ is going to stay with you and maybe surface again in another book?
So the character that I cut out of the book, it's his point of view that I cut out. He's still in the book. He's probably the other main character, and you see him. It's just you don't get to see his point of view. Before it was this happened, and we get to see how he experienced it, and then we see how she experienced, kind of thing. And it was just getting too confusing, really, even though it's only 2 points of view. And that just really cleaned up the book and made it shorter too. And publishers like that too, because it's cheaper to print and you make more money. Anyway, we don't want to get into those kind of details. They lose so much more money on that George R.R. Martin, those books. No. I don't think they do, actually. Yeah.
So just back to your original talk about sort of creating the rules. Do you have a list of rules or a set of policies or that have guided you through this book and for this land?
So the question is, do I have a set of rules, set of policies to kind of guide me through this land? And it's funny, I'm too lazy to make lists. And so a lot of it is happening while I'm writing the text. I'm going, this is the way this works. And the guideline is more when I'm doing the rewriting, when I go back and I start changing things so that it all works to whatever this certain rule is. Like, one of the things about this character is that she gets magical abilities. And she can never quite define exactly what they are. And that's my goal as the writer, is to make them a little bit mysterious, so that she doesn't know. Most everybody else knows exactly how to use their magic, and she's, why doesn't this work when I want it to, kind of thing, which is kind of like technology when I think about it. But so I guess I have them kind of in the back of my head, but often, unlike many writers, I just don't write enough things down. I just jump into the story, start telling it, and then in the rewriting kind of try to make it all make sense.
Two questions interrelated. Are you a seat of the pants type writer or an outliner? Do you edit as you go, like the next day you look back what you wrote and you edit, or do you just get through it and then go back and edit?
To answer that first, you can probably guess, I'm by the seat of my pants. That's how I write. It's just I start the story and I keep going, and I kind of have an idea of what's going to happen next, and I usually know what the ending is, and then I aim towards that, and everything else is a surprise to me. And anytime I have written an outline, it just hasn't worked out for me. Someday I want to, because it seems to save a lot of time in terms of the things you have to cut out. And in terms of the actual kind of writing, I spend a lot of time on the first chapter, and a little less time on the second chapter, and a little less on the third, because each time I'm getting faster and faster and further into the story. And for me, that's how it's kind of, I envision it like a train that is slowly getting faster and faster, so that by the time I get to the end, it's like everybody died, and I'm sorry about that. That's oh no, that's not what happens in this book, just to let you know. But that's how it works for me. Is it's really, I'm moving as fast as I can to the end, and then the actual work of it really comes in the rewriting. That's when I have to make it all make sense, and all those things where it's like you're dealing with, for me, Arthur in the future. It's like, Arthur in the future is going to fix all these problems with the plot. And then Arthur in the future gets there and goes, oh man, I can't believe you left all these problems for me, because I'll have to fix them. Seems to be a lot of time traveling now. There isn't a mullet, is there? Well, good. Well, there's one more.
When you're writing, do you write with music, or are you silence, or what?
Oh, when I'm writing, I do write with music, and it's all heavy metal all the time. It's very sad. and my daughter's getting sick of it, yes. But I do have music. I like it. It's not just heavy metal, but I do have music going all the time in the background. It's funny, I don't hear it. Like, you'll put on the start of an album. I guess it's not really an album if I'm listening to it on iTunes, but and it'll go all the way through, and I'll go, oh, I didn't hear a single word, but that blocks out the rest of the world. Not that I'm trying to block out my family or anything like that. I wouldn't want to get that impression.
Puts you in a certain mood, like does the music change the mood, or the?
Yeah, the music actually, I think it does. I often pick music that kind of reflects what I'm writing about. So actually, heavy metal works fine for fantasy, because there's lots of fantasy lyrics in heavy metal. But I know that even I wrote a book that was set in World War I, and all those songs are free. You can download them, and that's all I listened to for hours and hours, was songs from World War I. And it really helped me understand kind of, what people were interested, what they believed back then, and what kind of, not that you can read a whole bunch into the kind of music we're listening, and you might be sad about society if you thought too much about that, but it kind of lets you know what the society as a whole is thinking. So music can actually be researched too, but not so much for this book. Yeah.
Yeah, I came in close to the beginning, but not quite. Somewhere in, I think, after the mullet.
Yeah.
When did you start your writing career?
I guess there's kind of two answers. One is I started writing when I was 16, and that's when I wrote my first book. And I thought I'd be published and a millionaire by the time I was 21. But I didn't actually get published until I was 30. And I had written 6 books by that point. It was my 7th book that was published. And I'm not yet a millionaire, in case anybody was counting, anything like that. But I've made 1 million pennies, at least. So, yeah. Yes, that's right. That's right. My first book was not very good. It was practice. In fact, I had 6 books of practice. Well, good. Well, I want to thank you all. That was who I was supposed to thank at the beginning. All of you. Thank you so much for coming. It's such a nice day out. What are you doing in here? But I will gladly sign books, and there are refreshments at the back. I love the word refreshments. It's so refreshing. So you're welcome to have refreshments, and if you have any more questions, just come up and ask me. Thank you so much for coming.